Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. And today I'm reviewing Roleplay Adventures in the expansion Nefras' Judgement from Thunderworks Games. Roleplay Adventures is, as the name implies, an adventure game. It's a game in which you and any number of players, or any number of characters for that matter, are going to be wandering around different scenarios, different maps, basically, going through your journey book of what's happening in the particular adventure you're in as you make choices in this choose-your-own-adventure storyline. It's basically choose an adventure with a degree of dice manipulation and dice mitigation thrown into the experience. It's a 1 to 4 player game. Each individual adventure takes anywhere between, on the low end, 60 minutes, but I'd say on the low end 60 minutes, on the high end 2.5 hours. I'd say typically you're looking at 90 minutes to 2 hours for a session, although it will vary because this very much is a choose your own adventure game. This very much is a choose your own adventure game with all the associated consequences, the branching storylines, the impact to what you're doing, impacts that will carry on across the 10 episodes that are in this. I think there's 10 episodes, a finale, and a side quest I believe they have, so potentially 12 adventures in here. I'm currently 5 adventures into it. There's still a whole lot more to go. Take that into account that I have not experienced the entire thing yet, although I believe I've experienced enough to be able to talk about this, well, to definitely talk about my opinion. But past that, let's go ahead and get into it. It's a choose your own adventure game. Choose your adventure game, you're going to be making choices, you wander around the map, trying to manage the dice and the tests thrown your way. It has fail forward as a mechanism, meaning you don't really fail so much as continuing, well, you do die. You do die, but even if you die, you come back again with a degree of consequence to the scenario, a degree of consequence to your characters and impacts to your experience and what happens to you when you die. But this is fail forward. This is a story. You're trying to move forward. You're trying to see what happens and experience the world as you're given choices and agency as far as what happens, and trying to utilize the mechanics of the game to merge with the choose your own adventure impacts and aspects of the game in order to get to the conclusion that you are going to get to the conclusion that you're trying to get to, whether or not you actually do so. The game system involves you basically wandering your miniature around the map. You're going to start in a location. You're going to have a storybook. The storybook will have a degree of starting setup as far as what you do, how you place things, and then you have your adventure begins. You're going to look at the location you're in, which often is a number. Well, it's always a number. It's A, B, a letter, always a letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever they are. You're going to go into the particular storybook for that. You have the map set up for your particular adventure. You're going to use a storybook for your adventure, and you're going to go to the location you're in and start reading. This is a good point to note. There are no spoilers in this review past the fact that I'll briefly read from the very first adventure and still not really do anything for you. You get to the first location. As you look over the lake, a voice calls out to you from a thicket behind you. Care to join me? You turn to discover a friendly halfling roasting apples and hears by his fire. You look like you could use a meal. From there, as you wander through the actual story, what's happening in this book, you're going to be presented with choices. Do you want to go left or right? Do you want to save the family or possibly leave them, abandon them? Do you want to rescue that person or just run off to the side to deal with whatever's going on in the corner over there? How do you want to interact with the world around you? Because there are going to be a lot of choices. Something just happened. Do you go to try to figure out what happened over there? Or do you move to the other location to try to figure out the backstory of what happened? When you get to the location, you see someone trying to sneakily plant something into the corner. Do you stop them? Do you not stop them? Do you report on them? All of these things you do are going to have choices. Choices outlined in the storybook, which again, I won't heavily show you because I do want to avoid spoilers, but you're going to have these choices, and the choices often give you something you're trying to do, either like a direct, do this or do that, and those will come with potential encounters you'll have, skill tests you'll go on, or various people you have to fight, because ultimately the mechanical aspect of this game does come down to dice manipulation. It comes down to either engaging in a skill test or combat in order to use your gear and the weapons you gear and skills and traits and all those things that you have to manipulate the dice to get the outcome that you want. That's what you're doing in this game. You're making choose your own adventure as the primary mechanic as you wander around areas, but then you're manipulating dice as far as the actual mechanical aspect of the game past the story aspects to it. And so you're going to make these choices. You want to go ahead and convince that elderly woman to give you that apple because you think it'll help you in your quest. Well, now you have to go ahead and try to make a persuasion test. So you're going to go ahead and grab this little book over here. I'm making up the woman. I'm making up the apple. I'm sure there's an old woman. I'm sure there's an apple. And it's definitely a persuasion test, but the exact specifics over here are all made up. We're going to go ahead and find persuasion. I'm actually hoping there's a persuasion test. Yes, there is, because maybe there wasn't. But persuasion. You're doing a persuasion test 1 over there. A 1 over here means you're going to be drawing 4 dice in the bag, and you have to try to go ahead and get those specific aspects. This is where your stats are going to come into play. Before you do anything else, you're going to have certain stats printed on your board. Mine are already mid-adventure, so again, no spoilers, just numbers over here. But you're going to have certain stats based on the board, and that's going to give you stamina that you can pay in to getting the necessary dice. If you are a character that's better at your strength, your dexterity, your wisdom, you'll be able to use those attributes in the related thematically integrated tests in order to manipulate the dice you get from the bag. If you're trying to focus on it, right now we're doing over here, persuasion is going to be a combination of charisma and strength. which makes sense. A little bit of charm and a little bit of threat combined together is how you persuade someone. And so you can utilize either or both of those attributes from the players, from the characters in play, to try to generate those dice. So in this case, let's go ahead and we say we're going to go ahead and give some of our strength, and we'll go ahead and get our hands on a red die from the bag, and everything else we'll just, we'll hope for the best. So we're only drawing 4 dice for this particular test, because that's what the strength test 1 does. And to that end, we're going to draw 1 red, but we're still going to draw 3, meaning the dice you draw help you lock in the color, but you don't draw more dice. We're going to draw 3 more random dice from the bag and pull them out and hope for the best. And we have a purple. So you're looking over here and we need a purple, a red, and we need a purple or a red, but we don't have that many of what we need, so will we succeed or fail? Well, let's play it out and see how this works. So we're going to go ahead and roll some dice over here because we have to actually figure out the numbers now. And we have a purple 2, a 6 red, a 1 over there, and a 6. So this is what we have over here as far as the dice we're playing with. This is where you're going to start utilizing all the gear, all the things you've acquired across the scenario, across your adventure, from the very get-go when you spawn your character. Characters that, by the way, you can import from Roleplayer. So if you built a character in Roleplayer, you have that there, you could import that character into Roleplay Adventures. Or you can use one of the many, many, many pre-generated characters to get your character. In my case, we're going to go ahead and look at my hand of cards, and we're going to see what we can do. Because we're trying to turn that purple into a 3. We're trying to turn that red into a 1 ideally, or the purple could arguably be a 1 as well. But we have options and tools at our disposal, so we're going to go ahead and look at our cards over here. And we're going to take a look, and we have a few options. Let's see if we can manipulate that color of the 1. If we can manipulate the color of that white one over there, that red won't help us. We could turn a 2 into anything. We could turn an anything into blue or green. We could turn any die into a 6, which doesn't really help us, unfortunately. So our character's dice over here won't help a lot, but we can use our class ability to return 2 stamina from the attribute row of the die in order to flip a die. So we're going to exhaust our class ability, which we'll have to rest. We're going to flip that die, put it on the 1, and we're good to go there. The good news is we also have the other character over here, because this is a 2-character game. Let's see what we can do as far as these other ones. We can go ahead and can we change the color of a die over there? We can re-roll that. We can make a 1 any color. So we can utilize Stalwart over here to make that 1 any color, locking it onto there. We still need to manipulate that purple up by 1. Can we go ahead and manipulate the purple up by 1? This is where it gets a little tricky because you don't always have the tools you need at your disposal. I could use my leather greaves, which I'll go ahead and do so. So I'm going to use my leather greaves to re-roll the purple. And we got a 5 over there, which isn't unfortunately helpful enough. We could, not a lot we can do over here. We could make any die into a purple, but that won't help me. So you're going to start trying to play with these over here, and then you either succeed or fail the test. I'm not going to heavily dive into it. I'm actually pretty sure I could do it, by the way. I think that I could add more dice and then turn those dice. There are things I can do over here, but I'm not going to heavily dive into it. The idea is you're playing with your cards and all your various manipulations in order to try to find the outcome that works for you. To try to find the outcome which you can manipulate the dice, the colors, the numbers, in order to get a successful skill test. Now the good news is whatever happens, there is an outcome. If you fail to persuade the old lady to give you the apple, your story is not over. There's just a consequence. There's perhaps a branching storyline. Suddenly one pathway of the story might be closed off to you and another one might be open. Passing or failing is not about passing or failing. You're trying to pass because that's the storyline you're trying to do. No different than in real life. If you want to succeed at something, well then you try to succeed at the thing. But if you fail, life is not over. If you fail, other doors close, other doors open, your story moves onwards. And that's what happens in roleplay adventures, although sometimes, unlike in life, sometimes like in life, your story does result in death, and sometimes, unlike in life, death is not the end. Death is going to result in you respawning, having a degree of something and consequence to your story, to your adventure, marking your death track, getting stuff back, losing some experience, potentially getting some boons along the way. Death is not the end here. But we're not done yet because we have to show you combat as well. Combat follows a very similar sequence with some small differences. And one thing we're not heavily getting into is the various stat aspects. There's a limited number of card plays you have per turn. There's a limited number of bonus plays until you get them back through resting. These are other elements that restrict the die puzzle in front of you, but they're elements that you can level up and adjust as you go through the game. But going to a combat, a classic combat might have you fighting against let's see what this enemy is, fighting against a insectoid. We're fighting against an insectoid over here. Combat's going to have 3 rounds, which we'll mark over here. The first round of combat, second, and third, at which you have to ultimately win by the 3rd round or not. So they're a little bit more forgiving than skill tests, but also skill tests don't usually result in death the same way combats might. In combats, you have the enemies hitting back against you. Same core puzzles happening. You're going to go ahead and draw dice equal to your combat dice limit from the bag. You can upgrade that as you go through the game. And you're going to assign those dice, and again, you can pay to alter the colors. You can assign those dice to these values. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and have these over here and pretend that at the end of round 1, we've gotten those 2 dice marked, and we don't have these 2. Well, then around round 1, the insectoid is going to go ahead and lose a money. We're going to lose the money, but also we're going to lose another 3 health because these 2 dice are not marked off. Any damage on the round track or any damage on the unmarked dice slots are going to result in consequences, usually damage, sometimes other things like experience or stamina loss or things like that, but you're going to have various impacts to you, hitting you throughout the course of those rounds of combat. Although you go to the next round, you can draw more dice, you have more opportunities to slowly take them out. At the end of 3 rounds of combat, you've either won or lost, and sometimes you've either died or not, and that is how combat plays out in role-play adventures. And that's the core idea of the game. That's basically everything. You know everything you need to know. Well, mostly everything you need to know. We haven't talked about things like familiars, which are multicolored dice you can earn once you get into later adventures. I won't spoil when, but at some point, familiars will unlock, and you'll have the opportunity to have other dice manipulation. And the benefit is, like, you have these multiple colored dice, which give you more ways to manipulate. If you have a die that manipulates a red color die, you can manipulate a red and actually unintentionally get a white manipulation out of a red card. So this can be very helpful in that sense throughout the adventures. But you're going on these adventures. You go through the storybook, you make choices, you eventually make your way to the end. You have this progression system the game gives you as they look at each location in the game, as they slowly have experience on locations, you mark them off, you mark off different things or different keywords or earn titles. Again, I'm not showing you these things, so I don't want to spoil things for you, but you have keywords and titles that will drive your adventure. You go to the goblin camp and you have a certain keyword, you'll have a different interaction, which means this game evolves around you. Your choices matter as you go through the adventure. Going to a place when you are known as the protector of the realm is going to have a different aspect and interaction and consequence than going to a place when you are the scumbag of the underworld. Again, all fictional things, but the concepts are there. The concepts are having a world that adjusts to what you're doing. That's how you can have a map this small, a map that only seems to have 3 or 4 interaction points on it, and despite that, there's a lot going on. There's also going to be a degree of kind of randomized encounters on the map as well that will have you diving into this much deeper, larger journal full of tons and more interactions you'll have that will unlock in a randomized order or fashion, or may never unlock at all. And again, we're giving you titles and ever-going consequence to the adventure around you as it moves from one adventure to the next, to the next, to the next. That person you rescued in Adventure 1 may show up in Adventure 4, and they may interact with you differently depending on whether you adventured them, whether you rescued them, or threw a rock at them in that first adventure. That is what's happening in the world of roleplay adventures. Lastly, let's dive into Nefras' Judgement. Nefras' Judgement is an expansion you can integrate into the game from the very beginning. In fact, you should integrate it from the caveat. You should integrate it from the very beginning. My personal recommendation is play the first adventure and then learn Nefras' Judgement. The reason for that is the rules overhead. Nefras' Judgement, technically speaking, doesn't actually start executing until you're into the second adventure, which means I recommend learning roleplay adventures. It's a very quick and easy learn, diving into the game, playing that first adventure, and then immediately from there incorporating Nefras' Judgement, because it only really starts from Adventure 2 onwards, and that means you don't have to learn 2 things at once. But Nefras' Judgement effectively gives your characters backstories. We have these little things over here. Again, no real spoilers are going on. But we have your various backstories you can have. If you're playing a 2-player game, 2-character game, you can have multiple backstories per character in order to give you more of an experience of this. But it's giving you this giant is really the key word, this giant book full of more backstories, more encounters. If you're playing as the Lost in Time backstory, you're going to have interactions in different adventures. It's going to say, hey, in Adventure 3, 7, 8, and 9, in these particular story points, you'll have an interaction that feeds into your backstory. You wander onto a farm and the farm reminds you of something that happened from your original backstory, because you're going to start the game by reading your backstory. You're lost in time. You're trapped in stone for many years. All you've come to know and love is lost to you. So you have these backstories, paragraphs and paragraphs of backstories, and then interactions that will feed into the backstory as the world of roleplay adventures interacts with Nefras' Judgement. It is easy to incorporate. Highly recommend incorporating again from Adventure 2 onwards for that rules overhead aspect. And from there, let's go ahead and dive into the review, opinions, all that stuff. Starting off with ease of play. Like I mentioned already, the game is pretty easy to dive into. The rulebook we have over here is, what do we have? It's not very long at all. It's, I don't know, 11, well, technically it's 23 pages, but a lot of it's unnecessary as far as all that. 20 pages, but very, very easy to dive into. This is incredibly easy. It's a very easy rulebook to read. I recommend going through it. It's not a lot. Yes, 20 pages, but not a lot as far as the rules overhead or the absorption of the material. It's basically, like I said already, you're wandering from location to location, you're making skill checks, a bunch of rules around different things, lots of the rules you don't have to read. What happens if you die? You can skip that until you die. story if you want to, or you can read it in advance. That's up to you. What happens at the end of an adventure? Well, you can read that at the end of an adventure. You're going to level up. You're going to spend your experience, your gold, your experience, things like that will carry over. There's going to be marketplaces full of cards, so you can buy more weapons, buy more gear, learn new skills. Things like that will happen as you go through this. But easy to play, very easy. Table space is not a lot. What you see here is what you get. This is basically set up for 2 characters over here. It's not a ton going on. As far as game time mentioned already, that's where you're going to have the biggest variance, anywhere from 60 minutes to 2.5 hours, although usually closer to 90 minutes to hour and a half to 2 hours is usually where you'll find yourself. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, first of all, the choose your own adventure in this game is arguably, I want to say arguably, I don't want to say for sure, arguably the best I've seen in any board game I've played yet. There's a lot of games out there that give you story, a lot of games that give you choose your own adventure, but the sense of sheer consequence to the things that happen in this game, I haven't felt as much of a choose your own adventure vibe from any other board game I've ever played. Adventure, yes. Story, yes. Choice and consequence, yes. Degrees of interweaving pathways, sure. But roleplay adventures is one in which I feel such a huge sense of loss over the degrees of story we haven't encountered as we've played through it. As we've gone into this game, as you see story path after story path, and that first adventure is kind of a tutorial adventure, so it doesn't have as much of that feeling in it. But as you start wandering further and further, there's real consequence to what you decide. There's real aspects of things you will never see in this game, huge aspects of story, huge amounts of cards and titles and all these things that happen in the game that you will simply never see because you chose this or that, and that this or that choice is happening again and again and again as you go into the scenario. You combine that with the backstories in Nefras' Judgement, because there's a whole, I mean, I don't even know, how many do we have here? We have, let's see how many backstories we have. There's a lot of backstories. Combine that with the backstories, combine it with the cards, with the interactions, all the characters you can play as, with all the different stats. We have something like, I don't even know the number over here. We have like 40 backstories, maybe it's 20 to 35 backstories. I don't know the exact number here. We have 35-ish backstories for characters, which you just won't be able to experience the huge amount of narrative text this game gives you. This game gives you not just variability, not just replayability, because you can absolutely dive back into roleplay adventures and experience totally different outcomes than you've seen the first time. We've been playing through this over on Twitch Live, and we have people going through it and watching. We've had people in the comments talking about how they've experienced completely different storylines from what we've experienced over here. Completely different interactions. You talk to this person versus that person, and suddenly your entire encounter is flipped on its head as far as what you're doing, how you're doing it. Sure, you have the same characters in play, but how you interact with those characters, how those characters interact with you, how those characters interact with you based on prior adventures in the storyline, it totally changes the way this entire adventure happens. It is choose your own adventure with a real sense of choice, a real sense of consequence as you go through that. Those multiple pathways in terms of the way you can engage with the game is just absolutely huge. And the fail forward, I mentioned this already, but I like the fact that it's fail forward. This isn't a game about dying. This isn't a game about winning or losing. This is a game about trying to engage with the world the way you want, and you either succeed or fail at that. But you're still engaging with the world. There's no replaying the same scenario 4 times trying to succeed. There's no sense of grind to it. There's a little sense of grind to it. We'll come to it, not to the story aspect. This is a game that wants you moving forward as you go through it. And the dice puzzle, speaking of the grind, the dice puzzle is a fun and rewarding dice puzzle, albeit it does get to be a little bit grindy as you go through the experience. As you have skill check after skill check and fight after fight, using the same cards again and again. Yes, you are leveling up your cards, but how often you get new cards versus how often you're engaging in encounters and skill checks, that's a different puzzle over there. So it is a little repetitive. We'll get into that in things we don't like and things we can see others not liking. But as far as the actual reward of the puzzle, more often than not, a dice puzzle, a skill puzzle, a combat, those are things in the game that are challenging to overcome. But if you work together, if you talk to each other, if you look at your cards, there's often a way through it. There's often a way to actually overcome that puzzle, and then you have that sense of reward, that sense of seeing that adventure in front of you, seeing the things unlock. Oh, we don't have the right dice, or we don't have the right numbers, how are we going to get there? Well, if you play this, and I play that, and you use the extra card play, and I use my class ability, boom, there we go, we've just defeated that person on round 1. There is that sense of accomplishment in the dice puzzle. A little repetitive as you continue to play through the game, but it is very accomplishing. And then you level up your characters. You level up your characters, you level up your party, you have the additional aspect to the game of just slowly getting more and more powerful, adding more stamina to pool, so your actual health, so you don't die as you go through things, adding more and more combat dice and more bonus plays, and figuring out ways to up your stats in the game. You have all of that in the experience as you go through it, further adding to your ability to actually interact and engage in the world, and to define your own destiny as you go through it. As far as things I don't like, First of all, sometimes the combination of cards, characters, and die rolls just mean there's nothing you can do. Sometimes you just go ahead and you roll the dice, you try for the best, you see what you can do, but you just can't do anything. It does happen. It's not that common, but it does happen where it is what it is. And so you walk into that skill test and you're like, well, I guess we're going to lose because we just drew all the wrong colors and none of us can manipulate the purple that's there, and so it is what it is, because the cards you get, there's a little bit of pre-gen, but then past that, the world will hand you what the world hands you, and that may or may not work for certain combinations of dice and numbers. And so it does have that aspect. Sometimes it's a frustrating puzzle instead of a rewarding one. And then lastly, I'll say that the end game loop can feel a bit tedious each game. Specifically, what I mean is the end game of each adventure. When you wander into the end of an adventure, you've gone through the whole thing, you've gotten to the end, usually get to your part of the adventure where it says, the end, you may now finish whenever you want. But usually there's a sense of exploration you still want to engage with. Well, now that I've finally done that thing, whatever that thing is, maybe as I wander from location to location, backtracking my steps, maybe there's new points of things to unlock. And the answer, by the way, is usually there are. Sometimes there are things you can unlock as you continue to wander around the world now that you've done X, Y, and Z. But the downside of that is it does mean that the end game of every scenario is a little bit of a tedious step as you flip through the book. Location A, okay, we have that. Do we want to use those items? What about this? We didn't try that. Do we want to try this? Okay, location B. Okay, we can do that. Yep, no. Okay, we're going to do that. What about location C? If you shovel the poop over there, maybe that will get us what we want. And yes, we've had a character die from shoveling poop. They lost their last stamina. They died from shoveling poop. That has happened to us in roleplay adventures. Fortunately, only one character died, so we were fine. But it was a moment. But you have that endgame aspect as you're wandering through the last few checks, but you're not even bothering to move your miniature around the map anymore. At that point, you're kind of done, you're just reading through things. It's a little bit anticlimactic as you wander around trying to make sure you've closed up all the loose ends. As far as I can see, others not liking, a few other things over here. First of all, mechanically speaking, like I mentioned already, this game is primarily an adventure game, a choose-your-own-adventure game. It's a story, choice, all that stuff, and then the one thing going on is that dice puzzle. Mechanically speaking, the one thing that's really happening in this game is a dice manipulation puzzle that is again and again and again and again. And yes, the puzzle gets different as you add more cards, or as enemies get harder. That does happen. You will eventually have those puzzles you just can't get past, and you feel like there's a challenge there that really is there. But also it can be repetitive, and that's the core mechanical aspect of the game. If you're not into story elements and you're not into that one thing I just mentioned, this may just not be the game for you. And secondly is, this one is a pro for me, but it might be a con for you, which is there's a really huge aspects of the story that are being cut off as you play. I love that. I love that sense that this is one of those few story-based games that I actually debate whether I'll keep it for a second playthrough. Maybe I hold on to it to play with my daughter in a year or two, because I can really experience and enjoy different aspects of the adventure in ways that I haven't now. It's not just replaying the same thing for someone else. It's replaying a different thing in the same universe, trying different story options or pathways, and it really does have that sense of variability. But also it does mean that as you're playing, huge aspects of story are cut off from you, and sometimes they're cut off from you with the results of a single roll. You try to murder the king in his sleep, and you just fail, and now suddenly a huge portion of the story is gone. Again, made up stuff, all made up stuff here. But that does have that aspect, and if you don't like that sense of seeing chunks of the game being slowly pulled apart from you as you play, this may not be the game for you. And then lastly, I like the story, I'm charmed by the story, but I don't think it's winning any major awards. I think it's a fun, charming world that's being built. If you're particular about the quality of the writing and the story, I mean, I think this is good, don't get me wrong, I enjoy it, but I just don't necessarily think it's amazing. I think it's a good story with amazing choose-your-own-adventure. As far as final thoughts on roleplay adventures and Nefras' Judgement, overall, this one is a really solid game that I've really been enjoying. I'm charmed by the world, I'm charmed by the choose-your-own-adventure. It gives you a sense of replayability, a sense of wanting to experience things. I love it when a choice has consequences. I love it. I love when a choice actually feels like it matters. It's not just some looping pathway, and it's not just some artificial thing of I either get the sword or the axe. No, forget the sword or the axe. You will never talk to that person again. You will kill that character. That person's ghost will be haunting you 4 scenarios from now, and that person's going to be reminding you of the thing you did 5 scenarios later. That sense of adventure and choice is so present in here that I feel the consequence of what I'm doing in a way that pulls me into the adventure of role-player adventures. I love this game. It's a 4.5 out of 5 for me. It's a little weak on the mechanical aspects of things. That's really my biggest critique. The other ones, the endgame aspect, fine, but like the biggest thing for me is it's got a one-trick pony as far as what it's doing mechanically, and it does get a little tiring the more you play through it, but overall, I really like the world that's going on here. As far as Nefras' Judgement, it's a 4.5 out of 5. As far as Nefras' Judgement over here, I think it's an easy to integrate expansion. It doesn't always flow entirely smoothly with what's going on, because often you're diving into one story, and then suddenly you interrupt for your backstory, and that is a bit of a thematic jerk out of what you're doing. But overall, I would say that I like it enough that I still like what it's doing, and I actually am excited about the things that they're doing with Gulpax's Secrets, which is the upcoming Kickstarter expansion, or upcoming expansion for the game. Gulpax's Secrets has professions, which I think is a more interesting twist on that aspect. But either way, I like Nefras' Judgement. I recommend it. Do dive into it right away. Do not do what I've seen some people do, which is think it's more stories, and then they don't play it, and then they realize they missed out. No, play this adventure, play this expansion as soon as you dive into Roleplay Adventures, if you have it. If you don't have it, I don't think it's essential. I think it's good, I think it's nice to have, but I think you'll get the excellent experience this is, even without the backstories. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Destinies. Destinies from Lucky Duck Games, I think, is a very similar experience to Roleplay Adventures. It is app-driven, which is, for me, where Roleplay Adventures slightly overtakes Destinies for me. I think they're both fantastic games, but I think Roleplay Adventures does it without an app, and as much as I am fine with the app in Destinies, I do prefer a lack of an app, but both of them are very solid. If you like one, I think you'll like aspects of the other very strongly. And secondly, Oathsworn. If you're looking for something that does what Roleplay Adventures does as far as the choose your own adventure, as far as that sense of exploration and consequences, you explore the world around you, interact at different points, but you also want a whole lot more mechanical depth to the experience when you're done with that part, Oathsworn is a great game that will give you the choose your own adventure aspects of Roleplay Adventures, but followed up with boss fights and other stuff going on that really dives a lot more into giving you the mechanical stuff along with the choose your own adventure elements. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful. There is currently, when this video goes up, there's currently an expansion for Roleplay Adventures for Gulpax's Secrets, as well as, I believe, opportunities to get this stuff, so I'll link to that down below. Depending on when you're watching this video in the future, that may just be stuff that's available at retail. In any case, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.